All right, we're looking at Chapter 7 vocabulary. This is the material that you should have already read several times by now. We did have the quiz the other day, and I'll get those quizzes back to you in a day or two. But this is all material that is in the book. This is all material that you have on your list of vocabulary terms. There's nothing new here. All right, let us begin. The Grange Movement, 1867. The original purpose of the Grange was to serve as a social club for farmers because of the isolation that you found in rural areas. Again, by definition, farmers live in rural areas, and your nearest neighbor could be several miles away, nearest town 10, 12 miles away, so you did not have a lot of time for socializing. Your children, you probably had a pretty large family, were taught at home by your wife, probably taught to read using the Bible, maybe some simple math, maybe a little bit of writing, but again, kids didn't go to school at this time. And so maybe once a month, the family would go into town to church, do a little shopping, and so it was very isolated. And so in order to spread information, new farm techniques, whatever it may be, new seed that you had tried, whatever, the Grange Movement allowed these farmers to get together and socialize and to share techniques, to share information on what I've been doing as a farmer, what have you done, what has been successful, I've done this and this was successful. Within 10 years, and we're looking in the late 1870s, early 1880s, there were over 1.5 million members of the Grange, and they are now beginning to urge some economic and political reforms at the state and national level. They are now looking to elect individuals who would pass legislation that would benefit the farmer. One of the things that was done was a law in Illinois in which a state could then regulate railroads. The railroads sued, took it to the courts, and in the Supreme Court case Munn versus Illinois, the court upheld the right of a state to regulate businesses, again mostly railroads, to regulate businesses that affected the public interest within the state. So the state of Illinois could pass legislation that affected business within the state of Illinois. Texas could do the same thing, New York, New Jersey, so forth and so on. Now, in a couple of years, a new Supreme Court decision will overturn that, but by then we already have the Interstate Commerce Act in 1877, which gives the federal government the power to regulate railroads and other businesses. Again, we're primarily talking about railroads with this case. And so the Interstate Commerce Act prohibited railroads from charging more for short hauls compared to long hauls. In addition, the idea was to ensure a fairer system of payment, that the railroads would not give a big customer, a big farmer, for example, who use the railroads a lot, not give them a far better rate than a smaller farmer who uses the railroads less frequently. To make the rates more comparable. So how do we make sure this is happening? Well, the Interstate Commerce Act created the Interstate Commerce Commission, and its job was to investigate any kind of complaints and then enforce the act. So I contact the Interstate Commerce Commission because as a small farmer, I am paying far more than you. As a large farmer, my rate is far higher per ton than yours because I use the railroad so infrequently and use them so often. I take it to the Interstate Commerce Commission. They investigate. They determine that the railroads are doing this, which is against the law, and they now punish the railroads. So not only was the Interstate Commerce Commission created to investigate and enforce the act. This is the first government agency to regulate unfair business practices. I realize you can't see the unfair business practices there, but you can see it on your paper. The Grange eventually gives way to the Populist Party. It is not a continuation from the Grange to the Populist Party, but much of the idea behind the Grange took root in the Populist Party. And you can see the years there, though there are a few more presidential elections after 1896 in which a populist runs. Really, the end of the Populist Party begins in 1896 with the loss of William Jennings Bryan to William McKinley. And again, we'll talk about that election in a couple of minutes. Okay? So the Populist Party is a national party which represents the common man. Now, again, this is a term that's used a lot today, but the common man of the day were the farmers, industrial workers, and miners. Today, the common man is just essentially a blue-collar worker. Now, what's that? Well, again, white-collar is management. So for teachers, if we looked at it this way, teachers would be blue-collar and the principals would be white-collar. If you work in an office and you're a secretary or you got a small little cubicle and you do whatever you do, you would probably be labeled as a blue-collar worker. Your bosses would be the white-collar. So today you have the average worker, you still have factory workers, plumbers, electricians, farmers, they're blue-collar. Those kinds of people are today what we call the common man. But in the period of time we're looking at, the common man was commonly used to refer to the farmers, industrial workers, and the miners. Now the platform. What this is real simple. What does the party believe? Today, the Republicans and Democrats, our two dominant parties, have different beliefs on gay marriage, on abortion, on gun rights, on the execution of convicted criminals. So the Populist Party platform fit what they're trying to do at that time. Today's Democrat Party, its platform, today's Republican Party, its platform, has evolved over the years. The Populist Party wasn't around that long to evolve. Anyway, we're looking at 8 items here that are part of the platform, of which 7 of them eventually become law, either through the legislative process or through the amendment process. And we're going to walk through them a little bit, kind of quickly. The only one that is not adopted is the first one, unlimited coinage of silver. What this means real simply is the country was going to make more coins out of silver. We were a bimetallism country. We depended upon gold and silver. Our economy was based on that. We've gotten away from that. And so the populists wanted the economy to be based more on silver, whereas the other parties preferred gold. And this is the only one that did not become law sometime down the road. The idea was to raise farm prices and therefore make it easier for farmers to repay their loans from banks. Okay. Now the rest of them all became law sometime down the road. B, direct election of senators. The Constitution calls for the Senate to be elected by the state legislatures. That changes with the 17th Amendment, giving you and I, the voters, more input on who creates the laws and helps govern our country. Term limits for president. Letter C. Now, the populists only wanted a single term. This will change, however, in the 1950s, thanks to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who we'll get to in a few chapters, running for and winning 4 terms. We do not go to a single term, we go to 2 terms. But the idea of limiting the amount of time a president can serve in office, again, the populists, that was part of their platform. Secret ballot, letter D. Prior to this, you could be easily intimidated because you did not have the right to vote in private. Today, you go vote, and it is the law. You cannot be followed into the ballot room or the ballot box or the ballot area by another person. Now, you can take a small child with you, of course. Say you're voting by yourself and you have a 2-year-old child in your arms. Yeah, you can take them with you. But unless there is some type of physical handicap that requires physical assistance to vote, you are not allowed to have anyone with you. Or probably a better way to phrase it, no one can go with you. So you can say all you want. Yeah, I'm going to vote for so-and-so. Yeah, I love so-and-so. Yeah, we all love so-and-so, but then you vote for the other guy when you actually vote. The idea behind the secret ballot is to give you more protection, to protect you from intimidation by the supporters of one or of the other candidate. Letter E, government ownership of railroads, telegraphs, and telephones. Now, this does not exactly happen completely, but we do have Amtrak, which is a government-owned railroad, a passenger train system. We don't have it down here, but you can find it in many parts of the country. We do have government-owned city ownership of services like water, sewage, garbage collection. No, it's not exactly the same things we see there, but we do see government ownership of certain things. Usually at the local level, and we're looking at services like, again, water, sewage, those types of things. Letter F, graduated income tax. All that means is the more you make, the higher percentage you pay. That's supposed to be a little arrow up. Yes. So you make more money, you pay a higher percentage. This comes about in 1913 with the 13th Amendment. The most evil amendment of all time. G, restrictions with quotas on immigration. We've already seen this. We've already talked about this in previous chapters. We have several laws passed in the 1920s to place quotas on people coming to our country. We have the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1832. The first time we begin to limit immigration to our country. And today, those quotas are still in place. And then finally, the last one, shorter work day, 8 hours. With eventually a 5-day work week. Now again, all of these, with the exception of the first one, come into play, come into being at one time or another over the course of the next 50 years or so. All right. Number 7, election of 1892. And then we have 8, the election of 96. And then 10, the election of 1900. Got a little video I'm going to show you on the election of 96 in a few minutes before we leave today. The election of 1892, okay, really one of the first elections in which the Populist Party makes some inroads. The Populists elect 5 senators, okay, 5 senators to the National Congress, and they received over 1 million votes for the office of president. Now, again, by today's standards, 1 million votes for president is not that big a deal. Of course, we do have a population of well over 300 million. Our population at that time was probably around 100 million, give or take. So 1 million was pretty good. Election 1896. Now, this is really the election which kind of dooms the Populist Party. The Populists support the Democrat nominee, William Jennings Bryan, who we have seen and heard several times, and we will hear and see from again. He is most known for his role in the Scopes monkey trial which we'll take up when we get to the 1920s. Anyway, Bryan lost the election to the pro-business Republican William McKinley. And of course, it is McKinley in 1896 who chooses as his VP Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy becomes president when McKinley is assassinated. So we've already seen a bit about McKinley. But again, the important thing is that McKinley was pro-business, as all Republicans were. Tariffs were a huge issue. And Republicans favored on tariffs, higher tariffs. Let's make a nice big line there. That is pretty ugly. Anyway, Republicans favored a higher tariff than Democrats. Because, again, Republicans dominated the New England, dominated the Great Lakes area where most of the industry was. Tariffs support and protect American jobs and American industries. That's why Republicans who dominated those areas supported high tariffs. Over the next 60, 80 years, as the numbers kind of switch, Republicans become the party of low tariffs and Democrats become party of high tariffs because Democrats today dominate those areas where the most industry is found in America.
Sir, but wasn't Roosevelt opposed to businesses?
Well, yes. Oftentimes a president, and the question was, wasn't Roosevelt opposed to this? Well, oftentimes a presidential candidate will choose a VP who helps round out the ticket. Roosevelt was a war hero, and so some of his beliefs were not the same as McKinley or the Republican Party. But again, a war hero, a very popular, a big name, never hurts when running for president. Not really, because no one ever thought that Roosevelt would become president. No one expected McKinley to be murdered. Now, the Cross the Gold speech will be discussed in a little bit of the video. I'm going to show you in a few moments. But essentially what he says, that Bryan, and I put in parentheses there, the crucified mankind on a cross of gold, Bryan was a populist in some ways, or he shared the values of many populists. One was, of course, moving away from gold to silver, which is one of the reasons why he was chosen by the populists. Even though Bryan was a Democrat nominee, the populists chose him to be their nominee because, again, of his support of silver. Of course, Bryan lost the election of 96. He also loses the election of 1900. Bryan runs again against McKinley. McKinley wins. Now, this pretty much ends the Populist Party as a major party. However, they do run a couple more candidates in a couple more years, but they're not really very successful. Over the next several elections, they do run and win some seats in the Congress and some local elections, but the Populist Party as a national party pretty much ends with this election. Partially due to new gold discoveries, which makes gold more available and therefore easily converted into coinage, higher farm prices, and rural migration of the cities, rural migration to the cities. Farmers were leaving their farms, heading northward to find jobs in the new industries that were being produced, being created. All right. Number 11, third parties. Now, again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I do want to take a look at a couple more slides, and I want to finish this up as quickly as possible. Third parties, essentially, are parties that, as it states here, provide an outlet for minorities to voice grievances and generate new ideas. There has never been a third party to win a presidential election, though they have played a role in determining who wins. 1992, a third party helps Bill Clinton defeat incumbent George H.W. Bush for president. 2000, the Green Party, its candidate Ralph Nader, helps George W. win a few states over the Democrat Al Gore, which allows George W. to become president, particularly in the state of Florida. So though the third party has never been overly successful, they have had a role in several elections in helping determine who wins. And third party candidates have won at the state and the congressional level, but never the presidential level. Progressive movement. Late early 1900s. Progressives took their names from the word progress, that we're getting better. Though they shared certain ideas, they did share some ideas with the populists. Progressives were mainly middle class, city dwellers, rather than farmers and blue collar workers. So the populace was rural, blue collar, usually poorly educated, lower income, where the progressives were urban, better educated, and often either management or ownership of business. The primary goal of the progressives was to correct political and economic injustices as a result of industrialization. As a result of industrialization, urbanization, which were caused, of course, by immigration. So essentially, the Gilded Age created problems like child labor, prostitution. The progressive movement attempted to fix it through the legislative process. Social gospel. What would Jesus do? Using Christian principles to attack societal problems. The Salvation Army, which, by the way, the A in Army should be capitalized, emphasized the Christian duty to help those who were less fortunate. So what you've seen on T-shirts or bracelets, what would Jesus do, WWJD, that kind of explains the social gospel. All right, real quickly on these, got a couple more slides. Capitalism we have discussed numerous times. The people are the owners of the factors of production, land, labor, and capital. We determine what is produced and how much it is sold for. Socialism, economic system in which the government owns the factors of production. Again, those exact same. Land, labor, and capital. The difference is in capitalism, you and I, the average person, owns those. In socialism, the government owns those factors of production and makes all the economic decisions. Muckrakers. Again, we have discussed this numerous times. Muck is dirt. Dirt created by the Gilded Age and cleaned up through the legislative process in the progressive era. We have one more slide and we'll be done with this and move on to something else. Famous muckrakers. Got 5 of them that we're going to take a quick look at. Jacob Riis, number 1. Photograph conditions of the urban poor. His book, How the Other Half Lives. Examine the conditions of American cities because of industrialization and immigration. Immigration, industrialization leads to urbanization, large cities. Large cities lead to overcrowding, pollution, the spread of disease, crime. And so Riis's book, and we've seen some pictures of it and some of the slides and videos we've seen, examines that and brings that to the national attention. Ida Tarbell, the history of the Standard Oil Company, which of course was owned by J.D. Rockefeller. She, in her book, The History of the Standard Oil Company, looked at the ruthless business practices, the unfair business practices of Rockefeller, and exposed them. Lincoln Steffens, his book, The Shame of the Cities in 1904, exposed corruption in the city and state governments. Again, what do all these have in common? They're exposing corruption brought about due to the Gilded Age, due to urbanization, industrialization, immigration. Frank Norris wrote the book The Octopus, a fictional work, but telling the truth, a fictional work that depicted the stranglehold of railroads over California farmers. Again, he used fictional names the way Upton Sinclair did in his book The Jungle, which we'll get to in a second, but it told what was going on in the country. And finally, the most famous of all of the muckrakers, Upton Sinclair, his book The Jungle in 1906, described the unsanitary practices of the meatpacking industry. We saw a little of this in the video I showed you a couple of days ago. Sinclair, was trying to expose the unsafe conditions, the poor conditions of the worker, but what gained national attention were these unsanitary practices. As we read the book, we didn't go, oh my gosh, those poor workers. We went, oh my God, we're eating that garbage. Which, of course, brought about change. Which, again, was the idea of muckrakers, to bring about change, to clean up, to fix the problems, the corruption of the Gilded Age through the legislative process.